Hello. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about, once again, Hockaday Respondus case study. This week in terms of chapter 10. So question 1 asks, what would our author argue are types of change should Hockaday responders consider? First, I want to define organizational change as described in the book. It is alterations in organizations, whether planned or unplanned. I think that the type of change that should be considered at Hockaday in their specific situation would be structural change, which is defined in section 10.6.3 of the chapter. It's change in organization's basic design by altering chain of command, work functions, span of control, decision-making protocols. The hot wash, I believe it was just called at the conclusion of the case study, showed evidence that there's a room for the management to alter the organization to meet new desires. There wasn't a whole mess of negative feedback, but there were little things that could be improved in the employee's perspective in terms of the definition of structural change says chain of command and work functions as well as the design. Also, technological changes, I don't necessarily think that they need to consider them at this moment in time, but being that their company is virtual based as well as relying on technology to communicate with their clientele, technological advances and changes, innovations, anything of that nature always needs to be considered, whether it be for productivity or communication in any area. It should be in the back of a manager's head. Let's see. Okay, and for question 2 now, should Jill be considering innovations or incremental changes? So first, the text section 10.1 defines innovations as new solutions to new trends. And I think the way that Hockaday's company is set up, I don't think they're necessarily one that has to consider innovation as often as, say, someone in a competitive industry. They aren't worried about people stealing their customers or making a profit or things of that nature. So innovations kind of affect them differently. If they were to consider new innovations, like I said, maybe slight technical innovations or structural changes, I think that introducing them in incremental steps may be beneficial, just because that way they could learn if the process is working or if it's not, if they should change something before kind of making a drastic change. Now for question 3, which process or model for innovation and change should be considered? Section 10.5.6 describes appreciation inquiry, or AI. I'm excited to hear you guys' answers about this because I was curious to hear your thoughts on what processes would work. But I thought it related to appreciation inquiry because it's defined as organizational change process affirming the best qualities of the organization through discovery, dream, design, and destiny. The goal of this process is to create a positive, productive environment by expanding on proven successes. I don't think that like I said, there's not any huge drastic innovations that are needed. I think that their structure is working for them, and so for them to just be able to build off of what is already put in place, I think would be more than enough for them to be successful in the future. They don't have to go through a drastic process and make a bunch of changes. Question 4 asks, what are the barriers to change at Hockaday responders? The most obvious barrier that was talked about in the text that relates to Hockaday responders was described in section 10.3.11, and that is organizational crisis, of course. Which the book defines it as organizational disruptions, which are unexpected and generated from either internal or external circumstances. In this case study, there was two crises, one major one. It caused a huge disruption for the company. They were worried about whether they were going to be able to get out of the situation successfully and fix the problem. And it kind of just shook the whole organization, essentially. Also, I could see a barrier possibly being trust, in the sense that it seemed that some of the employees didn't get along together. Perhaps Francois didn't trust that his team members could do a good job, or the opposite, maybe the team members didn't trust Francois as a leader because of his attitude and negativity. But I think that those are the main barriers that stood out in this case study in relation to this week's text. Okay, and question 5 now. Based on the text, is there anything you would believe Jill should consider? There was a quote that was talked about at the beginning of the chapter, and it says, improvement is generally described as doing something better, not necessarily new. I kind of touched on this before, but Hockaday is a successful company. They're good at what they do, and so by building on making something better, they don't have to pull a massive amount of resources and do brainstorming and go through all these processes. Instead, if they just take what works for them and add those small necessary steps that their employees want to see, or that are necessary to prevent future crises, perhaps, I think that would be great for the company. And sometimes managers could think, oh, innovations have to be something drastic, and it's important for Jill to remember that it doesn't have to be anything too major. Also, the concepts of sustaining and disrupting innovations, as well as resistance, are important, because these could be barriers in organizational change as well as progression. And so if they could be identified early on and by a leader, it's not necessarily stopped, but something done about it to address the situation, perhaps it will be more successful in the end. Okay, and I think that covers the questions for this week. Thank you.